Industrial Automaton issues recall for their popular Series 5 Gaunt droid due to faulty power cores.
And a special report, Glitter Stim, untangling the dangerous web of spice addiction. All this and more at 11. Welcome back, Galactic Citizens, to another episode of Hoth Topics, a podcast about Star Wars. I am Republic Commando Ian, and joining me, once again, is Imperial Agent John. Hey, John, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Ian. How you doing over there?
I'm doing pretty good. Hopefully, this time, we're going to bring a hot, fresh, new Hoth Topics to people. Some things have happened since the last time we got together. So, I think you have a list of news that we need to get to. So, why don't we check that out? What do you got for me?
Thanks, Ian. Recently at the New York Toy Fair, a number of fantastic Star Wars toys were announced.
I like those.
A few of them you might like. The Hasbro Black Series figures, the 6-inch ones that you and I collect.
I like those a lot.
They previewed figures from the Han Solo movie. I believe it's called Untitled and Untitled Solo, Untitled film.
I thought it was called the Solo Experience, featuring Solo, the soloist.
Oh, that could be it. But at the show, they previewed, of course, the Han Solo figure himself.
I don't believe you.
The dashing Lando Calrissian.
That guy's the best.
The mysterious Kira, who you might also know as Khaleesi.
Yeah, she has dragons, right? In the
I
set?
wonder, do you think she'll have dragons in the movie?
I hope that she comes with just dragon eggs.
Oh, that'd be nice. Maybe that's the whole plot.
Right.
I mean, those guys, we did mention last week that those guys got a movie.
Right. Correct.
Didn't we?
They did do that. We probably did. Maybe
this
not.
whole section may get edited out.
Yeah, whatever. Let the people know. Let them see behind the curtain.
Oh, that's scary. So the other figure they released, that they previewed, was the Range Trooper, which looked to be a kind of a cool mix between the Rogue One,
the tank driver,
right? And Shore Trooper kind of combo helmet, but with Snow Trooper armor and a very comfortable looking furry coat.
Now, are these the guys that have the really weird...
Oh, they got the metal
boots?
Yeah, the crazy metal boots.
They look like all-terrain boots. Like, I don't know any other way to describe them.
But for me, the most exciting thing is that they come with a new E11, and I've become recently obsessed with making E11 blasters. So now I got another one I get to make. I'm super stoked.
You realize that this is a choice, right? You don't actually have to...
Building blasters is not a choice, Ian.
Yeah, that's fair enough, but I mean, you don't need to make them all different for each. What am I trying to convince you for? It's just you're just gonna make more anyway.
Well, speaking of other new things, we also got a couple new bounty hunters coming out, and let's not say bounty hunters. No, they are bounty hunters, I guess. But a 6-inch Forlom and Zuckuss, so you can have your little droid party.
Oh, Forlom and Zuckuss.
Is Zuckuss a droid?
Zuckuss is not a droid. No.
He just has that weird face mask.
He's one of those little bug guys, and I cannot remember their name, and I'm going to get yelled at by people for not remembering.
That's fair. I mean, I will.
Yeah, he did it first. Get him. Community.
And then the other thing that they finally showed, they showed it at San Diego Comic-Con last year, but Grand Moff Tarkin, and I cannot wait to add him to my little diorama of Imperial commanders with Thrawn and Krennic and I guess Vader, kind of, whatever.
See, you have room. I don't have any more room left.
Well, that's because I only collect Imperials as a loyal Imperial citizen.
Right. I didn't specialize one way or the other, and now I just have no space. There are ones out that I don't have, that I haven't gotten, because I have no place to put them. But, so, maybe, I need to invest in a bigger, better lit case or something. Did you see any of those? I'm sure you saw any of those. What was inside the cases?
Oh, well, another thing you won't have room for, they just announced Commander Wolf.
Okay.
Commander? So, if you've been watching Rebels or Clone Wars, he is the one in gray. The clone in gray. He's a good guy.
Well, I mean, arguably.
And one other figure that I saw that I'd like to mention is they're coming out with a Lando Calrissian in his Skiff Guard costume, which is kind of cool if you big fan of Landos. Are you telling me
that they're coming out with two Landos at the same time?
Yes.
That's a lot to handle.
I don't know when the release dates are because I didn't look that much because I was just excited.
That's and that's a really good reason.
But also on the Hasbro collecting side, they're bringing back the vintage collection. If you're familiar with the 3.75 inch figures, Ian, the vintage collection was Hasbro's reintroduction of the vintage style backing on newer figures.
So the old kind of, when you say vintage, do you mean like the Kenner figure sort of style?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, they had a run of that with the 50th anniversary for the 6 inches. So they're doing it for the smaller ones now.
Yes, and it actually used to be a line that they canceled a few years back.
Oh, okay.
And collectors have been begging them to bring it back.
Huh, that's super cool.
And I guess to celebrate the relaunch, Hasbro has created a website called Hasbro Lab where they will be putting up new or future products they would like to do, but they need crowdsourcing funds to help bring the projects to life.
Now, when you first mentioned that to me, outside of the podcast, I was super skeptical about it until you told me the scope of the projects that they were trying to do.
Their initial project is a 3.75 inch scale replica of Jabba the Hutt's sail barge, the Katana.
Yeah.
It is, I believe it is about 4 feet long.
This is a massive thing. If you haven't seen pictures of it, just go look at the prototype. You don't. It's really hard to comprehend until you see it. Just really how large this thing is.
And if you would like to get your hands on one, go to HasbroLab.com and be one of the first 5,000 people to pledge $400 or $499.99. They don't expect the run to be finished till I believe it was early 2019, if they can get 5,000 backers at $499.99 each.
Whew, that's I'm not that we're not that successful yet. We don't have that sail barge money lying around.
One day we'll have two.
Yeah, one day we'll have all the sail barge money.
Exactly.
I'll hang them from the rafters and display them for all to see. As an icon of our success.
That's really it for the toy news, though, that I found interesting.
You got no more toy news for me?
I mean, there's a couple other things like the Rogue One infantry tank that the Imperials had. They're coming out with for the 3 and I'm never gonna remember 3.75 or 3 1/4. But they're getting a tank. And the 6 scale guys are getting a dewback.
I like tanks and dewbacks. Both those things are good. Well, if you don't have any more toy news for me, I got some news for you that you might find interesting.
Go on.
Mark Hamill is to receive his star on Hollywood Boulevard coming up very soon.
Now, is this an official star, or is he going to go put one himself?
I wish it was just him going up somewhere and saying, hey, this is mine now, but this is going to be an official star. It's going to be in a special ceremony in front of the El Capitan Theater on March 8th at 11:30. I believe that's in the AM. And that's really cool to me that he's getting his own star, because he's one of the first people that I could really recognize from Hollywood, because as a kid you don't really pay attention to actors, but you pay attention to Luke Skywalker, so that's pretty neat. And it's going to be a newer star in hopefully a better area, because Hollywood Boulevard, some of those stars, they need to be taken care of. They're not as shiny as they once were. So luckily, Mark Hamill's going to have his own nice brand new shiny star right on Hollywood Boulevard, and that is exciting to me.
So you know better than me. I know that a lot of the stars have a little symbol on them based on what they're receiving the star for.
Right.
Is that something they still do? And which one would Mark Hamill be getting his under, for television or for movies?
I believe his is going to be for movies.
Okay.
And I think the television movie one might be the same. I'm not 100% on that, but I think it's the little camera icon.
Okay.
I should know that, but you know what I'll do? I'll go up there and I'll check myself.
Yeah, and report back to us.
Absolutely.
Live.
It actually could be cool. So if you're in the area and March 8th in front of the El Capitan Theater, I don't know if this is an open event, but you might be able to catch a glimpse of Mark Hamill and his star. So that's really all I have for news for this week. Why don't we get right into the topic of the week, a look back at the fourth and final season of Rebels. Gonna start seeing the last episodes and the last of the series. And so we decided to go back and take a little look at the episodes of the season up till now and do a little analysis and kind of see some cool stuff that we liked, some things we didn't like, and we're going to talk about that here. Spoilers ahead. So obviously we are going to go over season 4, but I thought when we started doing this, there are some things at the end of season 3 that were kind of important to go over and get to. Mm-hmm. So instead of just starting right off the bat in season 4, we went back and we watched 0 Hour parts 1 and 2, which were the season 3 finales. And there were some things that I want to get your opinion on. First of all, last time we talked in our flagship first ever podcast, Woo, Go Us, we talked about our favorite characters, and yours was Thrawn. And Thrawn obviously has been playing a big part in the Rebels franchise since season 3 started. And you do like the new incarnation of him, right?
I like almost everything they've had him do in the show, except for one thing, which will come up later today.
Okay, it's going to be a part of our episode discussion.
Oh yeah, it's in there.
Okay. Oh, I'm excited to get to that because I don't actually know what you're talking about.
There's not many times where I have problems with Star Wars, unlike my friend here. This is one of them.
I have opinions. That's not necessarily problems.
You have strong opinions,
but not strong problems. Some problems, but no, it's opinions. It's it's whatever.
Good way to Jedi spin that.
Yes, the Jedi have hired me as their PR director, so
That's
I'll be
unfortunate. It's 2 of them.
Ouch.
4 of them? I'm not sure.
I think there's 1 of them. Kind of. Anyway, getting back to the topic at hand, Thrawn, the people responsible for killing the Jedi. Just kidding. Not really, but Thrawn in Rebels, he's a big presence. He's a big deal, and he's a major threat. Blue presence. He's a major threat to the Rebel cells, and one of the reasons why he's such a big threat, in my opinion, is these Rebel cells. They're still just cells. They're not the full-blown military force that we see come together in Rogue One and solidify in the original trilogy to eventually come together to beat the Empire. And Thrawn is one of the few people in the Empire that doesn't see the cells as just something that he can quash without any real problem. Any of the other Imperials are more likely to say, oh, we can just take them down, they're just these tiny cells. But Thrawn understands the threat of the cells joining up, and that's really sets the precedence for this whole episode and going into season 4 is he knows it's a threat if they unite. He knows he can't let them come together and fight against the Empire, so he unleashes this devastating attack on Chopper Base. So what do you think about that kind of unusual stance that Thrawn takes, as opposed to his other Imperial buddies?
I think it has to do with Thrawn's introduction to the Star Wars universe as a whole, not just in Rebels, but in his book. He didn't come from an Imperial-controlled world. He didn't grow up with the same sort of propaganda, no matter how true, that the Empire pushes on the citizens of the Empire. Right. It's weird saying the Empire multiple times, meaning it different words. Anyway, So he doesn't have the same arrogance that most Imperial officers have, which, as we all know, Luke Skywalker, Jedi Knight, once said to Emperor Palpatine, "Your overconfidence is your weakness."
Your faith in your friends is yours. Yes, I remember the quote quite well. And we see that Thrawn isn't your typical Imperial in his tactics, even though at the beginning of this episode, even we see an example of this. He gives the classic, we're going to destroy you, not going to accept surrender from you. But later on, once he has them cornered and Chopper Base is really under his control, he then offers surrender to the people that are there. And that's not something you see from your typical Imperial looking for glory.
Well, I think in that particular instance, he was only going the merciless Cobra Kai, sweep the leg, no mercy style at the beginning, because he wanted to crush the forces that were present.
Right.
I think the only reason he offered surrender at the end is because he knew that he had beaten them.
Right.
And he wanted to make sure that they knew that he beat them.
And that really goes to show the brilliance of the character and why he's so feared by the rebels and the main characters. Now, there was something, I know this isn't your avenue, this is more my personal thing with my Jedi love, but...
Hokey religions.
Hokey religions, yes, and ancient weapons. Can't forget the ancient weapons.
I'm sorry, but I don't think they actually exist.
I'm not going to take your bait there, sir, good sir, kind sir, and I'm going to move on with my point. And that point is, I really liked something that Kanan said. He was having a conversation with the Bendu when Thrawn was attacking, or right before Thrawn attacked. The Bendu, being the Force Moose, I like to call him.
He's the middle.
He is the middle. He likes to tell people he's the middle. And he told Kanan that he is the middle and that he brought this death and destruction to the planet and he wasn't going to help. And Kanan said something that I really liked, which was that he couldn't just let it burn down around him. Watching the Empire come in and all this destruction, he tells the Bendu that he was like him. He just sat and watched and screw whatever happens. But in the end, he couldn't just let all the death and destruction and the injustice go on happening. And I think that goes to show why Force users are such a key thing in Star Wars, is that they're these individuals who have the power to inspire and rally and do more than your average person. And for good or ill, that's a really powerful force, no pun intended, but that's a really powerful thing that we see throughout all of Star Wars. So that really hits on the importance of Force users, and I like the quote a lot. And the Bendu was affected by that, really. He got angry at Kanan, but he really thought he must have had some effect because he turned into a thunderstorm, which... oh boy. Yeah.
Come on, Jedi fanboy, can you explain that one to me?
Oh, no. I really wish I could. The Force... anything's possible with the Force is really all I got, because that was one of the things where I just went... maybe a little too far for me. So I do have my limits on my Forcey fandom, but it's and we found a little bit of it here. But in the giant cloud in the sky screaming at everybody,
and I think that's the key with the Bendu. He was mad with everybody.
Nobody was spared lightning bolts that day. He did say something very interesting, though, to Thrawn, and I don't 100% remember the quote.
Oh, but I do.
Oh.
Well, let's say I don't, but I can cue it up for you.
Well, let's do that then.
What do you see?
I see your defeat, like many arms surrounding you in a cold embrace.
That's legitimately one of the first times we see Thrawn look uncomfortable about
concerned at anything. Yeah.
It's super weird because he's such an imposing character. But that mention of defeat, it sets up this sort of Star Wars cycle that we see, not just in Rebels, though the themes of it are really strong here, and we'll mention it again down the line, of defeat, hope, victory, and that cycle just continues and goes around. And we really have that set up and established here for the rest of the series going into Season 4. So we did that. We ended Season 3 on a really creepy note from Bendu, and with Ezra and the gang being rescued by Mandalorians, and that feeds right into our Season 4 premiere with the Heroes of Mandalore Parts 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. 2-part episode. Some really interesting stuff happens in these episodes. I mean, the whole series is pretty interesting. One thing that I really liked was the fact that Bo-Katan, who is reintroduced, she's the sister of...
the late Duchess Satine?
Satine, thank you. Yes, the late Duchess Satine, who we saw in the Clone Wars. Bo-Katan is still loyal to the idea of the Jedi. In fact, that's really close to actual quote from the episode. We are loyal to the idea of the Mandalore that the Jedi put me in charge of. And that's kind of a weird statement, because we always think of Mandalorians as a whole as kind of not really meshing with the Jedi culture, at least after the Clone Wars kind of era.
Yeah, we basically learned in these episodes that all their gear was made to fight the Jedi, or to counter the Jedi's power.
And that's another cool thing that we see here. I agree with you. We get a lot of Mandalorian development in terms of their culture and their lore. And the catalyst for that is this massive super weapon that was built by Sabine that takes the Mandalorians' greatest asset, which is their Beskar or Mandalorian iron armor, and
turns them into Mandalorian ovens.
Yeah, and then turns the resulting Mandalorians into Mandalorian dust. And that is pretty hardcore. Cool. The first time we see it, it's at the end of the first part of Heroes of Mandalore, and it's a really impactful ending. We think that Sabine's brother and mother die. This is after they've gone on a rescue mission to get her father back from the Imperials. Mm-hmm. And that it's super impactful. It would have been more impactful if they stayed dead, but it's a show for younger audiences.
I think the impact for it was the fact that, as mentioned earlier in the series, that Sabine had developed this weapon.
Right.
This was her project when she was an Imperial cadet.
Right. Yeah.
Or at least in the academy.
So, yeah, that's true. It is a huge part of this story. I think, again, the deaths would have been more impactful if her brother and mother would have stayed dead. However, this is a show geared towards a younger audience. That being said, we do then immediately see like 50 charred armor remains across this wasteland battlefield. And that's pretty hardcore for a show geared towards a younger audience.
True.
And
true.
We open back up in the next episode with just seeing the devastation of that super weapon and seeing how affected Sabine is by her weapon, and the Mandalorians themselves, how they're reacting to it. It's pretty powerful stuff. The super weapon itself, bringing it back to Thrawn, he's, at least in my opinion, he was really concerned with the fear of the weapon being overused to control the Mandalorian people. Mm-hmm. He's, again, that kind of goes back to his disagreement with a lot of the fear-based tactics of the Empire. He'd rather use some of those, but also not be limited by it. And that's what makes him a strategically insane enemy. So we get a lot of cool Mandalorian stuff, a lot of cool Mandalorian heritage and culture. Was there anything that stood out to you about this sort of Mando-heavy episode?
I think just how much Mandalorian history and culture that was kind of fleshed out in this episode. I don't think we've really seen anything like that since the EU wipe.
Right. We got a little bit of it in the Clone Wars, but
right. But in the Clone, to me, the Clone Wars doesn't count as much because it came out pre Disney purchase, but I'm more interested in seeing is what Disney will do with the Mandalorian lore, Mando lore. Yeah, that's
good.
Horrible.
Bringing it back into the mainstream canon, seeing what elements they're going to pull.
Even like going back further to the Old Republic game, Old Republic Online, which you play.
Right.
If any of that Mandalorian culture will make it into canon going forwards.
And I agree. That would be super cool to see, because there's a huge love for Mandalorians. Just in the fandom, we see people making their own Mandalorian armor. Like you mentioned, I play the Old Republic. I'm in a role-playing guild. People love to role-play Mandos. And it's kind of interesting to think that whole love of that sort of style just came from how cool Boba Fett's armor looked. You know?
Right.
That's kind of an interesting thing. There was just an interest in this one character, and it exploded into this huge bucket of lore. One thing that happened towards the end of the episode is we see that topic of hope and fear coming up again when Sabine turns the weapon against the Mandalorian leader at the time, who's loyal to the Emperor, by switching up the shock, making it go towards Stormtrooper armor instead of the Mandalorian Beskar. And she goes kind of... I mean, she's not a Force user, but she goes kind of dark side on him for a minute, just with letting him feel the pain and the shock. And Bo-Katan actually has to come in and say, hey, do we want to be our enemy, or do we want to be better than our enemy? Do we want to use this weapon to cause fear, or do we want to provide more of a hopeful start, a hopeful restart to the Mandalorian culture? And there's a little bit of that rebellion, a little bit of that Jedi sort of ideal sprinkled in to the Mandalorian kind of hardcore warrior culture, which comes out to be a pretty interesting mix.
Yeah, Obi-Wan was a bad influence on her.
Oh, Obi-Wan is a great influence on everybody. How dare you, sir? I'm so frustrated with you. We're just going to move on to the next couple episodes.
That was a terrible segue.
But it was a segue nonetheless. In the Name of the Rebellion is the next two episodes. And we get a really deep look into a character that we were introduced to in Rogue One with Saw Gerrera. There are a lot of heavy political themes in this episode. These two episodes, starting off with basically a verbal punch-up between Mon Mothma and Saw, both of whom make really good points, and it's hard to pick a side, honestly. Even though we know from Season 3, with the episodes on Geonosis, that Saw's methods are not what we would consider great.
Well, at least what the other rebel cells would think are great.
Right. So I want to get your viewpoint on this.
Well, why don't we go ahead and play that clip?
Okay.
And we'll discuss it after.
The Empire considers both of us criminals. At least I act like one.
You target civilians, kill those who surrender, break every rule of engagement. If we degrade ourselves to the Empire's level, what will we become?
There she is! That's the leader the rebellion needs! Where is that fire, that passion, when your people need it most?
So, after that heated exchange, Phoenix is sent on a mission to slice into a comm tower, which goes pretty wrong because Ezra's ideas are bad. Luckily or unluckily, however you want to look at it, Saw shows up to save the day and blow up the comms tower and takes Ezra and Sabine with him on a mission to figure out what the Empire's doing with something he has a lead on. He's pretty paranoid about it. He's not quite sure what it is yet. We get a little glimpse into that going forward, but I want to get your opinion on what we're seeing now with Saw as he appears here and what we know of him both before and after this.
Well, for me, the strangest thing, even after watching the episode, and it wasn't until about 5 minutes ago, really, that I realized what would make it make sense for me. It's just how eager Ezra is to help Saw again. I know he in the previous episodes where they're on Geonosis together, he believed in some of the things that Saw was doing up until the end of that episode.
Right.
He liked the idea of doing whatever they could to fight the Empire, but when he saw the tactics he was using, he kind of backed away. In this episode, he doesn't seem to have any of those reservations when they first meet up, and it made me think, or what I realized is, maybe he's so eager to help him because he thinks that he can change Saw. But I think we all know that Saw's way too far gone,
right,
for that sort of thing. I know Star Wars has a huge emphasis on the theme of redemption, but not everyone can be redeemed,
right,
redemptified,
and not everybody who needs to be redeemed is really all that evil. Like Saw's just, they did a really good job of making his paranoia just legitimate enough for him to be right, but just overboard enough for him to be an extremist, just because of all the things that we've seen him suffer from, starting in the Clone Wars. And we, of course, when we get to Rogue One, we see the culmination of all that stress and paranoia, and he's just gone completely off the deep end. And he thinks, even the person he adopted as a daughter is there to murder him. That's how far down the rabbit hole he's gone. But he still has legitimately good points. And that is something that I think plagues Ezra, like you said, throughout this episode.
And they absolutely touch on that towards the climax of the episode, after Saw turns on Sabine and Ezra and stuns them both.
Which he's very quick to point out the difference between shooting and stunning.
Yeah. Which, that's weird for him. Because he stunned stormtroopers earlier, which is totally unlike him.
He's not super crazy just yet.
Yeah. Ezra kind of asks what he's doing, or what his mission is there, and Saw comes back with Adam with something I think that would really resonate with Ezra and his predicament with Lothal.
Let me ask you this: what would you do to save your world?
He finishes up that with saying how it's too late for him in his world. His world's gone. But his point kind of seems that if he can do something for the galaxy as a whole, maybe that will make up for the fact that he can't do anything for his home. And like I said, I think this would resonate with Ezra, because Ezra has shown that he agrees with Saw's methods if it gets the job done, to a point. Which he tries to do with the Rebel Command, to help him get forces to Lothal, to help free Lothal, and that's all he thinks about before the other planets in the galaxy.
Right. And we see that lead into the next two episodes, where he ends up going back to Lothal, and maybe a lot of what Saw said resonates with him. Up until this point, a lot of what Saw's saying kind of goes to show how much Rebel Command is still, they kind of have their head in the sand about this, how direct this conflict has become. They still think they can operate under the radar, not take any risks, and even though Saw's methods are extreme, he's still right in that we're in all-out war now. You can't just sit and wait and try to sneak around all this. And that attitude kind of lasts really all the way into Rogue One, where they're still arguing about whether or not it's time to do full-out conflicts in certain areas.
Well, the representative from Terrace just said, just straight up yells, if you want open war, then we're out.
Right.
But that's for another day.
And she, her planet was turned into glass thousands of years ago. So I can understand the hesitation for open warfare. But we go back to Lothal in the next 2 episodes, which...
Real quick, just to end up the In the Name of the Rebellion Part 2.
For sure.
We start off with Ezra eagerly joining Saw, unwilling to join Saw on this mission to find this Kyber crystal.
Right. Which is what they're looking for, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Probably should mention stuff like that since we're just skipping over most plot points.
It's fine. Can't
Ezra,
uncover all the secrets for everybody.
Exactly. Well, we need to find them, like Saw.
Right.
At the end of the episode, Ezra and Sabine reunite with the rest of Phoenix Squadron, and Saw just kind of happily lets them go. That was one of the other things about this episode that bugged me up until just before this recording. And I realized that, maybe what's happening is Saw is still kind of buddy-buddy with Ezra, even though he disregards or disrespects how the rebels deal with things. Because I think he sees a little bit of himself in Ezra, and thinks maybe he can change him. Maybe Ezra will join the Partisans if he can just do that one thing that gets his brain to switch. That's
kind of interesting because, like you said earlier, Ezra seems to have that same attitude towards Saw.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And people say Rebels is a kid's show with no deeper thought or meaning.
And dead Mandalorians.
Well, there are a lot of dead Mandalorians.
Oh, then we did it.
Speaking of dead Mandalorians, there aren't any in this next episode.
Well done.
But... Hey, you know what? Segues are hard. A better tie-in to the last episode, though, is we talked a lot about homeworlds, and we spend the rest of the season, at least the rest of the season up to we know of, back on Lothal, starting with the occupation. And this episode starts off with a great big Force vision. Amazing start. I have never heard of a Force vision that was even 60% accurate, let alone 100%. I don't know why people put so much trust in them. It's actually something that really makes me wonder about the Bendu's vision for Thrawn.
Padme died during childbirth.
Yeah, this is
100% accurate.
I haven't heard of many Force visions that are 100% accurate. And you could argue there was some wiggle room in that one. Especially in the TV shows, you gotta be wary of Force visions. There's always some sort of other thing going on behind the scenes, some mystical Force BS. But we have Ezra and the Phoenix crew having to get smuggled back into their planet that they've been to so many times. Well, Ezra's planet, Lothal.
There you go.
I was trying to not think of... Never mind. But it's we have a reunion with Vizago, our friendly neighborhood almost Hondo.
Almost Hondo. Never will be Hondo though.
But we do need a Vizago Hondo team up because that would be... I'd watch that all day, every day. Not a huge amount happens here. We kind of get to see the state of Lothal after it's been under Imperial control for an extended period of time. We see a lot more clamped down rules and regulations. People are under curfew. The bar that they used to get
Old
information at, Old Joe's. Old Joe is old no more. He got anti-olded, very dead at the hands of the Empire. Kids show, everybody. But it really triggers a lot of stress in Ezra seeing how bad things got in his homeworld, and I think that kind of echoes back to the things that Saw was kind of talking to him about. And he does
I think
lose
he
control.
blames himself,
right?
Because when they left Lothal the season before, he promised the Resistance there, or at least Ryder, I guess, was the Resistance, that he was going to get the rebellion to send help, and they never were able to.
Right, because again, rebels have their heads in the sand about the whole actually needing to fight conflict. But we do get to see a little bit of resistance happening going forward with the Flight of the Defender, a new advanced version of the TIE Defender, which is why Thrawn has such a hold on Lothal. His factory is there, and it's they're dangerous. I mean, even before being Disneyified, TIE Defenders were a big deal in the EU. Mm-hmm. One of those elements that they brought back. It's a TIE fighter with shields, and this new one has a hyperdrive. So it's they're not something to scoff at. And we get our Rebel friends picking up on this new Defender, and they want to check it out and see how big of a threat it is and do a threat assessment. We open up with the adorable Lothcats. They are... Are
they?
Yes. What do you have against Lothcats?
They're too cute. I don't know what their motives are.
What their motives are? They're just adorable little pets that help the rebels.
Are they?
Yes. What? John's got some issues with Lothcats, some suspicions. Don't listen to him. I don't know what he's talking about. They're adorable, and everybody should love them. You know who doesn't love Lothcats? The Empire. I'm really weird about animal, violence towards animals when it comes to films. I'll watch somebody beat up on people all day, every day, if they deserve it. But the Empire, these two stormtroopers start shooting at the Lothcats. And that, you know what?
Is rebel propaganda. That's not something the Imperial troops would do.
They absolutely did. Do not listen to John.
There's no proof of this.
The enslavement of multiple worlds is one thing, but those...
Enslavement? More like make better.
Those Imperial, very nasty adjectives. They shot at Lothcats, and that's not cool. Unacceptable. Terrible. Everything. Not the point of the episode, however. The entire thing goes awry when Thrawn shows up to observe this new flight of the TIE Defender. And understandably, his presence freaks everybody out again, because he's such a terrifying character. And it's that theme of intelligence and strategy that's beaten them down every time, or they've barely escaped from. It really instills fear. And that's kind of, it's kind of crazy to me that these people who have faced so many, they've faced down Vader, they faced down Darth Maul, they faced down Inquisitors, they faced down all the odds being against them, the full might of the military, and Thrawn just showing up and standing there is enough to spook the entire Phoenix crew as they try to get this Defender thing.
And not only does his presence cause Ezra and Sabine to kind of reevaluate their plans, but once they do get a hold of the TIE Defender, or at least Ezra gets a hold of one, Thrawn uses this to evaluate the new TIE Defender. One of the things he says to Governor Price when she is suggesting using a kill switch on the specific TIE Defender Ezra has, Thrawn mentions that he wants to see how a untrained pilot can fare against trained pilots in the same ship, and the fact that Ezra is able to outwit regular TIE fighters shows that anybody can take a skilled pilot could take this craft and just wreak havoc with it.
And it really, yeah, you're right, that amplifies the threat of these TIE Defenders, which is a central part to why Lothal is key to the Empire's strategy. And Ezra and Sabine take out these trained pilots, and the kill switch is then activated, and they go down. And this is where we get the introduction to the Loth Wolves and the White Lothcat. Just my kind of mythical force BS right there. I'm all for it. I like the concept of the Loth Wolves. They're just cryptic and strange enough for me. They don't go too far into the Bendu Stormy nonsense, at least not in this episode, to go too far. But yeah, they're the right kind of force stuff. I enjoy that kind of cryptic, vision-y, cool animals. I wonder if I would have liked the Loth Wolves more if I wasn't expecting them, because Dave Filoni loves wolves, and I know this, and I'm wondering if I didn't know this, if I would like them even more, because I was expecting them, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, but we get even more Loth Wolf stuff and TIE Defender things in our next episode, going into Kindred, and we get the introduction of a character who is brought back from the extended universe.
Are you talking about Ruch?
I am talking about Ruch.
Ruch.
Now, why don't you tell me a little bit more about Ruch, because you are more familiar with him in his EU appearances.
Well, I can't tell you much about him in the new canon. I believe that this is his first appearance.
Correct.
In the EU, he was introduced, I believe, in the Heir to the Empire novels alongside Thrawn, because he was his Nogri assistant slash
assassin,
basically personal assassin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who, spoiler alert, at the end of the series kills Thrawn.
Oh.
Though Thrawn was kind of okay with it.
He seems like he would be.
Yeah, because it was done very beautifully and artfully, or something like that. It's been a long time since I read that book.
Hey, that's fair enough. One thing I'm a little worried about is that Rook's coming into the game really late. I mean, he's coming in season 7 of the last season.
Season 4?
Season 4, episode 7 of the last season of the show. So he might get a little scrubbed on that.
I don't think they'll have him perform the same role as he did in the novels.
Right.
I hope they don't kill off Thrawn in the book or in the show. But they haven't really established the same kind of background as Ruch had in the novels, or like how the Empire like oppressed his people and stuff like that.
Right.
So I don't think they'll go that way, and I think they'll just kind of keep him as Thrawn's expert assassin.
Right. And an expert assassin he appears to be even in this incarnation, because he's weird and effective at hunting down Ezra and the rest of Phoenix Squadron, because he just a Spectre team rather, he just goes off and immediately finds them and chases them down after they were outed of the TIE Defender, and pushes them into a series of cave networks where their only salvation is the Loth Wolves, who show them a way out. I mean, he leads Governor Price right to them, and Governor Price decides to do what all good Imperials do and send in a bombing run. And I have a question for you, John.
Hello.
When has not confirming the kill after a bombing run ever worked out for the Empire? It is a very flawed strategy, in my opinion.
I have no words for you.
Oh.
I can't think of another time when they didn't confirm the kill or actually killed something.
The the thing that comes to mind for me is Empire Strikes Back, where they send the TIE bombers to bomb all of the
fair point.
the asteroid field. I mean, there were space worms, so can be kind of hard to confirm kills when they're giant space worms wanting to eat you.
True. And I think that they're mostly trying to scare them out.
That's fair. Okay. I'll retract my statement for now.
But I mean, Governor Price is pretty inefficient at her job.
Accurate. And we get to see a lot of that. In fact, I'm going to bring that up in a later episode. But we see another Bendu moment happens here in terms of Force weirdness that goes a little too far. And it is when the Loth Wolves lead Kanan and Ezra and crew through a warp tunnel to the other side of the planet.
I think that one of those wolves ate the TIE Defender's hyperdrive, and this is how they're able to travel.
You know what's really sad about that is that I'm almost willing to accept that, because it's one of those things that's just a little too far, a little too on the power scale in terms of the Force for me. Because I think one of the things that makes Star Wars and the Force and the technology in it so unique and something that makes it so it can exist is that there's limits on the technology. There's limits on the magic powers. There's sort of these limiters in place so that the conventional warfare, the war part of the Star War, can still exist. And that's something that I think puts it, you know, people like to compare Star Trek to Star Wars, and they're two different beasts, and I think that's one of the main reasons. And you know, if Star Trek's your thing, I'm happy for you. I need to get into it myself, but I think that's a key difference between Star Wars and a lot of these other both fantasy and sci-fi shows, is that those restrictions are in place to make the conventional atmosphere and the real lived-in feel of it, and the realism. I can't believe I'm about to say the realism of a Star Wars movie, but there you go. Those bits that we see that are close to our world kind of connect, and the Force tunnel to the other side of the planet kind of breaks that for me.
Kind of sounds like you're dealing with absolutes, Ian.
I am not a Sith, if that's what you're implying. But it's just a little off-putting. That's all. I'm not saying it's gonna ruin Star Wars forever for me, but you know, it's just one of those things that I have to go, all right. You know, that's out of my flavor realm. But
so you weren't a big fan of the Mortis arc in Clone Wars.
I was not a big fan of the Mortis arc in Clone Wars, and we're gonna get a little bit more of that if the series finale trailer has anything to say about it. Who knows? They could do it, and it could completely change my mind on it. My mind is flexible.
Well, before we move on to the next episode, I wanted to know if you spotted something on one of the cave drawings in the cave that they eventually ended up in.
Right.
The wolf magic tunnel ended at.
I did notice something that you pointed out, but then you kind of noticed something further. Yeah. I noticed the connection with the Jedi because I was able to identify the lightsabers on the belts of the cave drawings. Mm-hmm. But you saw something pretty cool.
So, for like a split second, below this cave drawing, with a bunch of figures that appear to have lightsabers, all kind of standing around a big circle sort of thing, I think it was.
Something like that. Symbology.
There's clearly a Yoda species at the very bottom of it.
And for all we know, that could be Yoda. I mean, he's old, right?
Before you properly introduce the next episode, I just want to say, World Devastators, Ian.
World Devastators.
Back. We brought them back.
We brought them back from where?
Rogue Squadron.
Oh.
And, other literature.
So
And these ones are just slightly smaller.
Slightly smaller, they're massive. If you don't know what we're talking about, John is referring to the massive World Devastator mining crawler things in the episode Crawler Commanders. In this one, we're introduced to these giant destructive machines, which I am told are called World Devastators.
Yes. The ones in the episode are about a fourth the size of the ones in the EU. I think.
So what I never really got from the episode
what they do?
What they were doing.
So if they're anything like they are in the old EU, they have a port, I believe it's on the front, that just sucks up surface material.
Okay.
The inside is a refinery, which refines it into basic materials. Metals, alloys, and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, it makes sense. I mean, they are run by the Mining Guild, which Mining Guild has appeared a few times in the course of Rebels, and I still don't really know who they are. They seem to be a big deal.
Probably from the corporate sector.
Yeah, something like that. The Zerka of the new canon, I suppose. But other than a reunion with Vizago, seeing the threat of the World Devastators and what they're doing to Lothal, it's not an episode where a lot happens. But the next episode certainly is a place where a lot happens. We're moving on to Rebel Assault. It's the mid-series finale episode. Now, the whole reason that the crew's back on Lothal is really to do a threat assessment. And after seeing the World Devastators, after seeing the TIE Defender, that's going to provide the Empire with a new weapon to wreck Rebel stuff real easy.
Woo!
There's enough evidence gathered to call for a Rebel assault on the TIE Defender factory. And Thrawn knows. He knows that this attack is coming. He prepares. And even though once the Rebel forces finally make their appearance, even though they're vastly outnumbered, Thrawn still takes the threat seriously. And we get more of the scoffing captains and it's just a small strike force. We can defend ourselves against everything.
I had a lot of issues with both Rebel and Imperial strategies were in this episode.
Yeah, there were some questioning things. What do you got for me?
That small strike force you're talking about, just a handful of X-Wings and Y-Wings, they're attacking an Imperial-held production planet. Why are they sending a small strike squadron? And the only thing I can think of is that this is the precursor to the Death Star can't do nothing against small ships. But they weren't going up against the Death Star. Of course, no one knew what the Death Star was. Why wasn't there some capital ships that the Rebels sent in to help cover the strike force?
It kind of feeds back into that, we don't really want to commit.
That's fair.
I mean,
or maybe they just didn't have the resources at this time.
I mean, it's still not smart, but yeah, I agree with you. So the Rebels did not go in with a great plan.
And then
the Imperials.
This is earlier I mentioned that there was something Thrawn did that just thoroughly upset me. And well, let's break down what happens. Hera's in her X-Wing. Its shields get knocked out. An ace pilot is chasing her on a TIE Defender that is shielded. Hera starts heading towards Thrawn's flagship, the Chimera, kind of goading this TIE into following her. Thrawn calls the pilot, the TIE fighter pilot, and says, "Hey, she's leading you into a trap. Don't do this." And the pilot says, "Oh, no, that's cool. I'm a follower. I know what I'm doing." Thrawn then opens fire on Hera's ship, missing her ship, friendly firing the TIE Defender, knocking out its shields. Now they are both unshielded. Hera is able to turn around and kill the TIE Defender. Now the problem is, if Thrawn had never fired his guns, the TIE Defender would not be unshielded, and Hera's plan wouldn't have succeeded. So Thrawn knows Hera's plan, tells a pilot not to fall into the trick, and then continues to do the trick. They're falling like if he knows the plan and doesn't open fire, Hera gets killed. Unless Hera's plan was to crash her ship into the Chimera, she's still dead. You still win, Thrawn. Your Death Star has shields.
I think this is gonna...
And we all know that only A-Wings can go through the bridge of a Star Destroyer.
Right, we've seen evidence of this.
This is true.
Now, I think this is going to be one of the first instances of many where we have to play the don't worry about the logic, this is a franchise for younger minds card.
It doesn't make sense, Ian.
I know. I know it doesn't make sense. But it's what we got. What we also got was the somehow breakthrough of the Rebel Assault Squad into the atmosphere, where...
It wasn't so much a breakthrough as a bunch of ships crashing.
Well, that's the thing. They get into the atmosphere, they get into the cloud cover, they're heading towards the TIE Defender factory, and a admittedly cool, for them probably terrifying wave of TIE fighters just comes out of the clouds, and a very hopeful ground force.
One might call it a tidal wave.
Oh my god,
I'll be here all week.
You shouldn't be. But you threw me off so bad. The tidal wave of TIEs just result in a really powerful falling star moment where we just see the hopeful faces of the ground crew looking up over the TIE Defender factory, only to see the burning, crashing rebel forces streaking in over the sky. And it's just a really impactful moment, and it goes back to that cycle of defeat, hope, and success, because they've had these defeats, they have hope, they're going to go in more powerful, and they're going to take out this factory, and it just crushes you back down with that defeat yet again. I don't know, what did you think of that moment with the TIE fighters falling out of the sky?
I was cheering. I was still... Because this tactic makes a lot more sense than whatever was going through Thrawn's head. I'm still upset about it.
I mean, it's still part of his plan.
Is it? Because his plan is dumb. I mean, that part of the plan was a good plan. But whatever he thought Hera was doing, which he also, I guess, was trying to do, whatever.
You have very strong opinions about this.
I think maybe they're working together. Maybe
it's a conspiracy.
Maybe that TIE fighter pilot was just on Thrawn's hit list. Yeah, but I cheered.
Right.
I'm a big fan of the Empire winning.
Well, you probably cheered when Kanan lost his mind a little bit and started charging off towards the city to save Hera. That was kind of funny to me, because if you think about like how a Clone Wars era Jedi would have been stopped by whoever was around him. Like, if you were a Jedi in the Clone Wars era, at best you would have gotten a lecture about how going after somebody in a fit of panic is not a good idea. At worst, you would have gotten knocked out trying to go help them out. But we have, luckily...
this is a common theme for Jedis. I mean, Luke did it like multiple times.
That's true.
I mean, he never finished his Jedi training because he had to get his hand cut off.
I don't think he had to. Spoilers for Empire Strikes Back, ladies and gentlemen.
Remember when he went off to save his father? It's
right.
dumb.
I think that actually kind of goes to show, maybe how things the Jedi say are bad aren't necessarily bad, and that's a topic we'll get into another day.
From my point of view.
Oh, the Jedi are...
The Jedi are a segue to the next episode.
Well, there isn't another episode,
but
I want to finish up a point on the Kanan thing, where he's stopped by our buddy, the Loth Wolf, and there's a little bit more of that master apprentice thing that we see. It's just the right amount of little forcey stuff to keep us hungover until the rest of the series comes out. Now, at time of recording, we have watched the next 2 episodes. They've come out. What we're going to do is we're going to take a break here, and hopefully, if you're planning on binge watching the whole thing, you can take a listen to this, get caught up, and meet us back here after all the new episodes are released, the series is finalized. We'll come back in and kind of go over the same things with the new and final episodes of Star Wars Rebels. Well, that was a lot of Rebel talk, but I think we're just about out of time for today. What do you think, John?
Yeah, that's probably a good place to wrap up. We'll definitely finish up the rest of the shows in a few weeks once all the episodes are out.
Mm-hmm.
There'll probably be a lot more discussion then. In the meantime, little tease for what we have coming up soon. We want to do a small discussion on the differences between continuity and fan service.
Oh.
In Rogue One, we got Evazan and Ponda Baba popping up, saying the same lines they do. Do you feel the same way about that as you do with Governor Tarkin and Rebels mentioning Krennic and Stardust? Trying to figure out what that line is that you are comfortable saying, like, this is a good thing to add to this episode that didn't take away, or maybe this was too much in this movie, sort of thing.
There are a lot of examples of that kind of stuff in Star Wars.
Well, until then, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us at hothpod@gmail.com. That email again is hothpod@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for joining us, and until next time, I've been John.
I currently am Ian.
And with our powers combined, we are Hoth Topics.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.